it's in the hands of the person who is at the head and at the helm, and alongside him the Minister of Defense, and alongside him the Chief of Staff. And the person who will conclude was, in fact, he was the Minister of Defense, he was a Prime Minister, and he was also the Chief of Staff. So it is an honor for me to invite the former Prime Minister,
ידידי פרופסור אוריאל רייכמן.
my dear friend, Professor Uriel Reichman. We've been friends for over 50 years, since we were in our officers' corps together. Dr. Hoffman, where are you, Ronen? Modesty that should not, actually has no room here or place here. My distinguished guests, one and all. This year we are marking 120 years since the first Zionist Congress in Basel. Next year, 70 years since the partition that brought about the inception of the State of Israel. In these 50 years, since the Six-Day War, undoubtedly, an apt time for soul-searching. Behind us, many achievements. Zionism was the national project that one can call the most successful in the 20th century, one with a daring leadership that saw things into the far distant future, a people who nearly was exterminated but survived. And so after those horrific ovens were turned off, Ben-Gurion found himself once again in the midst of war. Despite the difficulties, 7 wars, 2 or 3 intifadas, endless campaigns between them, and many another problem along the path. Israel today can now look back with satisfaction and pride. The population is now 12-fold what it was. The GDP is 60 times more. The shekel is one of the strongest currencies around the world. We're talking about a high-tech superpower and members of the OECD. Our progressive advanced army, equipped with unique Israeli developments, laureate prizes, Nobel prizes in sciences, rich cultural life, and an infrastructure quality and a positive outlook. It is the strongest country in the area, from Benghazi all the way to Tehran, and it will remain as such in the near future. And yes, diplomatically speaking, in other terms, close to the United States. Yes, in moments of test and truth, the people showed their resilience and such pride that was really something that is to be admired. Slowly but surely, alongside that, we see the shadows, though, along the horizon that hovers above us. So many feel that there is a kind of feeling gnawing away at us, that despite all that, we may be facing very significant threats, and that we may be on a course of collision. Yes, ISIS, Hezbollah, Hamas, and a stalemate with the Palestinians, friction with the United States, international isolation that is overbearing, and anti-Semitism, BDS, Salak, a loss of support from our congregations and communities, and especially on the university campuses in the United States, internal tensions, and a kind of gnawing away and of the various cohesion in our society, and a corrosion of the middle class, terrible gaps in the income levels, and for the opportunities for children. If you compare the periphery to the center, the way the Arabs are looked upon, and of course the division of the burden in civic society. Slowly but surely, the actual discussion and the discourse becomes inciting, rifting, and with no mutual dignity. We're talking about situations that are staining all of us and more. So these shadows are a plethora of them, but there are also opportunities for a regional settlement with the moderate countries and with the techno-scientific revolution that we are truly part of, and Israel is embedded in this possibility of opportunities. After all, we are at a creative people that can adapt. They can actually find themselves on their feet again after falls. They are ready to sacrifice and act. And in the periphery, and to the units, go there to the periphery, to the units in the army and the colleges, a patriotic, self-confident country that believes in itself more so than what you hear in the discourse and in the media. So go to the streets, go to the coffee shops, the community centers and the schools. There is an expectation for a steadfast leadership that should care and show and be a role model for all. In the people, there is a readiness for action and for sacrifice, a pride in our flag, anthem, and the IDF. The thing that troubles us is that there's no discourse about the future and our objectives. What do we want to reach and how do we want to reach? Where? There is no shared vision. Where is Israel striving to achieve and go to? Without it, we will fall apart. This shared vision, it actually takes from and draws from our history, from the Declaration of Independence, from the Bible, Herzl, Jabotinsky, Ben-Gurion, and from the model that they tried to emulate, and from the future, the past, the present, looking towards the future. So those who have sanctified the name throughout the generations, the embers that rose as survivors after the Holocaust, and the bloodshed of those who sacrificed their lives in Israel's wars. So in the 20th century and in the 70 years, what has happened? In the center of all that, the renewal of the sovereignty here in Eretz Israel, the cradle of our birth and our beliefs. A Jewish, Zionist, democratic state, Israel, which will be strong, burgeoning, secure, with a paragon society. That vision, that there's physical ways we have substantiated, but we still need to accelerate and gather momentum towards the summit and zenith. But Israel has national cohesion, secure in its achievements and capabilities, to look with open eyes towards reality, however cruel it may be, and act in order to defeat any enemy who wishes to exterminate us, and make concessions even if they are painful. Yes, burgeoning education, culture, science and sport, economy, infrastructure, and in the quality of its life. A paragon, spearheading society with internal solidarity, hoping to bridge the gaps within it, in taking all the hues and shades of that society in the light of the Declaration of Independence, giving an opportunity to every child, every citizen, every group. A society whose citizens will really make their dreams come true, that their children will be able to choose of their own will to live within it, that every Jewish young person around the world will be proud of his affinity towards it. And in the next 10, 15 years, we hope that Israel should be in that top line, the top position of countries that are proud of their achievements. We know that it is a wonderful, creative, dynamic, kicking country. No, look at the Singapore, the Finnish, Swiss people can do nothing that we cannot also emulate and do just as they do, if not better. But there are also difficulties. We are surrounded by threats and difficulties one cannot ever ignore, but we should not fear them. President Roosevelt said, "You should never fear that, rather than the fear itself." Yes, we have overcome many difficulties worse than those in the past. We will know how to grapple with those that are on their threshold, on our threshold nowadays. But without a vision, we will be dismantled, we will fall apart. Because you have to look at the history. Now we must call upon us for true molding leadership, but with a caution. You have to be very careful of any issues because of shortfalls, any dangers. Now right-wing, left-wing, religious and secular all understand and hope that their leadership will also understand that these important foundations for the fulfilling of that vision should be daring and not fear, pride and not something else, unity and not tribal separation, tolerance and not belligerence, and one-upmanship. But where has that leadership disappeared to? What happened to it? Why is it leading in a totally different direction? Why do we see day after day that this government and the man at its helm, pessimism, passivity, anxiety, paralysis, instead of self-confidence, valor, and the capability to take decisions and act? We're talking about bemoaning martyrdom rather than a feeling of pride in the heart of each Israeli. If we're talking about incitement one against the other, you're talking about, instead of truly trying to foster and enhance and nurture that kind of unity and recognize simply that at the end of the day, what is shared by all of us is greater, so much more than what separates us. We should deal with the capital instead of looking at the actual rank and file and care about their future. One-upmanship and a discourse of hatred and silencing the others, instead of mutual dignity, recognizing all the various shades and hues amongst us. And how does all this happen day after day, in contrast to the national interests, even in contrast to even the actual those of the constituents who elected the Likud, while actually making us deteriorate in the international arena? This is my answer. There has been a hostile takeover. The right-wing government, especially over the last year, is no longer the follower of Jabotinsky and Begin. Fanatic ideology has overtaken the Likud through breakthroughs and little loopholes after the primaries. Anyone who believes in the values of democracy more than populism or any immediate achievement. But as it goes on, using the fears and the weaknesses of those who are at their helm, they overcame and they overtook. Their agenda has become the leading agenda, while the formal leadership is following like sheep behind them. Do not err. Benjamin Netanyahu, he is responsible for the faults of his government, whether we're talking about a weakness of character or the Stockholm syndrome, or if this is a kind of rather belated revelation of his basic issues and basic beliefs and those of his family around him. The external reality here and around us and in the world is really difficult, and that we cannot blame the government for. The whole Middle Eastern order has collapsed. There, Muslims are slaughtering Muslims even more than the infidels, to such an order of magnitude that is unprecedented at this new age. Terror is promulgating around the world. Israel has never been a reason for the jihad terror or because of the Arab Spring upheavals. America is perceived as being weakening, and Europe has a multi-dimensional crisis and a wave of terror, and refugees. The Palestinians are no longer far from being an ideal partner. And the terror, when it emanates from that kind of mixed population, is not simple whatsoever. The diagnosis of the government are basically correct. The prognosis are all erroneous. In other words, what is happening? what should be done is totally wrong. What is happening, they see correctly. And then suddenly through this smoke screen with this kind of talent, suddenly all sorts of answers were consolidated through the filter of a very dangerous agenda that could push us down a slippery slope to a point of no return, that if we cross it, it will encroach upon the whole Zionist project. Our understanding of that, and it is not in their benefit, as I warned you over a year ago from this podium itself, that Netanyahu and his government, with his pessimism and passivity and martyrdom, that is the opposite of the Zionist ethos, whose values and principles were taking our destiny in our old hands. In other words, move, action, even if you have to take risks against what has happened in the past. I believe naively that this is a government that does not know exactly where it is striving towards, but many of our best friends around the world believe or even suspect that Netanyahu's regime knows very well exactly what they want, and the opposite is true. They have a covert agenda, perhaps no longer covert, that is deliberately trying to leave those sort of the master plan blurred, because they know that if they flood it, then it will collide directly with the Declaration of Independence, the values of the IDS, and the principles of Israel, the international law, and common sense. It will bring the whole world against us. It will actually destroy Israeli society totally from inside and disconnect the young generation of Jews in the United States from us. What is that agenda? Here is the answer. Our greatest supporters in the capitals of the world suspect that Israel intends to continue controlling all the territories that were occupied, released in 1967 forever. Secondly, Israel is not interested in a two-state solution, and it does not want a Palestinian state alongside it. Thirdly, Israel is waiting for the whole world to get used to and accustomize itself to this reality, hoping that terror in Europe and the United States and the situation in Syria will distract this attention from it. Fourth, that Israel will agree to autonomy with restricted rights for the Palestinians, but not for a state, not allowing them a state. And fifth, that Israel will cautiously continue building in all the settlements and beyond them in order to create gradually something that is irreversible, facts in the field. Yes, the Minister of Defense and the Prime Minister speak exactly the opposite, and they continue saying that the more the actual government seems to be entrapped in the hands of fanaticism. But in London, Washington, Berlin, and Paris, and the capitals of the world, Moscow and Beijing, no leader believes any word that is actually uttered by Netanyahu and his government. This agenda that it started in the wonders after the euphoria of the Six-Day War, developing the settlement of Judea and Samaria, but on the other hand, strengthening it. On one hand, they didn't want it, on the other hand, strengthened it. But when they ignore for a moment, if it was possible to do, from all the significances and the meanings, then this reverberates some of our deepest essence. And this has implications on all the actual domains and walks of life and all the partisan opinions and even the traditional Jewry. But that same agenda has been showed to be, in a very sober manner, as someone who is risking things unavoidable, however much it may seem, about our future, our identity, and even the continuity of the Zionist enterprise. If they fulfill this agenda, and that is the key word, this will bring about definitely either an apartheid country or an active participation that we do not want and will be isolated by all the world, and it will collapse. Or it will be a binational state with a Jewish minority within a generation or two, with a high probability of civil strife that will go on between its two parts. These two possibilities are the end of the Zionist dream and enterprise. No other alternative exists for those who are waiting for some kind of divine ecliptic intervention. We are now on the abyss, that just about to go down that slippery slope, and there is nothing more important and more immediate and urgent than curbing this so that we do not continue deteriorating and slipping down before it is too late. The most basic actual mistake embedded in all that is an ignorance of the action, ignorance of the reality under the leadership of Ben-Gurion, for example, what happened. And we should know that in all those scenarios I described, life, one embedded within another, will bring about a paralysis to be perpetuated through the generations between, for example, what happened amongst the Christians and the Muslims in Lebanon, or what happened between the Catholics and the Protestants in Belfast. Now we are in the primordial steps, the embryonic steps of old Johannesburg, Bosnia, perhaps even all of them together, with blindfolds and the hatred of our brothers that could only be similar to the nightmarish relics that we learn about from archaeology or in the wars of the Jews and the Talmud. Who of us, either a religious or a secular, left or white, wants that kind of result? And anyone has grown up believing in the truths of Jabotinsky will add, either in the name of God, who authorized this kind of hijacked government led by Netanyahu, leading us to this nightmarish abyss, that he may actually be radiating and conveying a totally different opposite message, but in fact what is embedded in it, we should not delude ourselves. In the 21st century, the world itself, not only the United States and Europe, but the other emergent powers, India, China, and Russia, will not accept this autonomy at any point, nor the thesis of one Jewish state from Jordan to the sea. They will accept one state, but only and if only they are a citizen with the Arabs and Jews for all its citizens, with one person, one vote principle. And who of us want that? The covert target of the actual government is that they want more the cohesion of the country, the greater Israel, instead of the cohesion of the people. And this will lead us to a collision with Israeli law and international law, with Israeli society and the values of democracy. And therefore, it is crucial from the point of view of leadership. And moreover, this objective must, of course, nurture a kind of emergency situation existent the whole time and a kind of fear spreading. Because people understand that in a healthy society, in order to carry all this out, this will, of course, make the Supreme Court go up on its hind legs and say that this cannot be accepted. And, of course, the people will go to the streets in order to curb these steps. And therefore, it is crucial to take steps ahead of time, gradually, slowly but surely, in order to weaken the Supreme Court and cut back on its authority and dwarf its status, and really to dwarf the whole civic society, to frighten them, make them go into a state of hibernation and silence their free expression. And all this is happening just under our noses. In the light of this, those who are pushing the sea to the Jordan River kind of agenda Netanyahu and his government have understood that these physical steps that will be necessary in the future in order to coerce and impose their desire, they should have a black flag hovering above them. And IDF and the Shabak, if God forbid they should refuse this command, they will have to actually slowly but surely collapse all the values of the IDF and the first-class instincts of our commanders and the creme de la creme of our soldiers, while creating hatred of all the others, silencing the other, populism, nationalism, and re-education the entire public, and especially the IDF, in a totally different kind of language. And after all, they will say we are all Eli Or, the great hero. And with this reality that we are facing, that will only be aggravated on its way to Johannesburg,
there's only one thing can justify it in the eyes of any life-loving Israeli, any position and any act. And what is this thing? This is a certainty of immediate danger to the mere existence, because under a mere existence threat, any annihilation, any fight is justified, and therefore the need of the right-wing government and Netanyahu at its head to crown the threat of complete destruction. And let us not err. There are many risks, and very few countries are exposed to those risks. The Middle East is a tough neighborhood, and Israel is going to exist only if its safety is going to be a supreme value in everything it does. Only the iron wall will convince our enemies to agree to its existence. And mere life, which is the goal of security, is important and more important than its quality. As a former chief of staff and as one who headed for many years the security system, I'd like to determine one unequivocal fact, and that is there's none of the threats that I mentioned, and we shouldn't underestimate any of them, and we cannot ignore any of them, but none of these threats today or in the foreseeable future is not an existential threat on Israel. From now on, we must say we are the strong ones. We do not dismantling our army or the IDF. The power of Israel and its achievements in the last 70 years have turned that into the strongest state in this area. The real existential threat on the beloved state of Israel, the one we dreamt of and fought for, is the agenda of the one state that I just described. It is much greater in its immediacy and its severity on any other threats that I mentioned, because with all of them we do have to fight as a very determined villa in the jungle. But let's go back to the logic of action of the right-wing government and its head. Those fanatics understand quite well that this agenda will be required in the future to take very extreme steps that only a threat as annihilation can justify it. This regime, headed by Netanyahu, is creating anxiety of immediate existence and real, quote-unquote, in the minds of the masses. From my experience, I know that ignorance, stupidity, and the limitations of the nature of man explain better things than any conspiration, this parade of human stupidity. I'm not saying that anybody in this government actually planned or the first one who identified the need to do things and derive the steps that we see today, because the nature of such deep processes is like water that accumulate to the lowest places. And they all happen under the threshold of recognition. And so, by our Prime Minister, he crowned first Nasrallah, then Ahmadinejad, Hania and Mohammed Def, Abu Mazen, and all the wild animals that are gauging and gaping at us, and of course El Gaita. each of them, he became Hitler. And above all of them, in a written speech of Netanyahu in English, the Mufti was as the thinker of the destruction of the Jews, and Hitler was just dragged on. The way the Prime Minister talks about regional threats, they're important and they're replaced, as harsh as they may be, is exactly the underestimation of Holocaust. Nothing else is that. Our situation is serious without Hitler as well. Israel is in its power and strength and act with self-confidence in order to solve all the security and political problems it has, even if it takes time to solve with action, political action, security action, without anxiety, without fear, with vision and daring. I'm not going to elaborate here all the details of attack on our democracy, on the Supreme Court and the civil society, there's freedom of expression, the independence of the media, the professional conscience and independence of the state comptroller, the legal advisor and senior officers in the army and in the Shabak and in the police, and the regulators in the business arena. Unfortunately, even principals of schools and educators who show too much independence in their thinking, the law of the NGOs, the law of the suspension, and the Israeli law on the settlers shouldn't have been incepted to begin with. However, only a blind man or somebody who's becoming rhinoceros will see the process of erosion of democracy and the buds of fascism that stuck to this government. Yes, I said that already. Not like in Germany, like in other European countries or South America. Yes, I know that 90 years ago, not 70 years ago, but if it looks like buds of fascism, and it walks like fascism, and it barks like buds of fascism, then it's buds of fascism. This is the situation, simple as it may sound. And I didn't mention yet the more serious events, the murder of Abu Khadir, burning the family in Douma, the uprooting of the olive trees, the writings, the extreme and the demands to continue with the sacrifice in the temple, where we didn't speak about the shooting soldier, and that the Minister of Defense are in posters with the kafia on their head and the jumping on the Minister of Defense, the encouraging talk with the father of a soldier to the parents of the shooting soldier, and maybe to strengthen the spirit and against the bad spirit that we see all over. The post of Netanyahu about the national rape with a group of Jewish people who shattered the crystal window shops of Arab shopkeepers because they're Arabs. How did we say it? Only a blind man or somebody who tries to be naive or somebody who goes to conformity doesn't see what we see with our own eyes. A society that wants life, that will not be able to look in the eye into the deterioration of values and morals, to call a spade, and to do everything in order to stop it, and to pay high interest for this failure, such as blatant extremism took over the Prime Minister and the government of Israel, and on behalf of an agenda which is sort of COVID, with a messianic voice, is dragging all of us to an immoral precipice. Who knows what's going to happen in the future? But let's talk about security. Israel is surrounded by threats that I mentioned and others, and the efforts of delegitimation, the BDS, and also anti-Semitism, hatred, and negation of the mere existence of Israel. These are not going to be shattered by victimization, but they only will be solved by talking to those people. The possibility to differentiate between people who hate Israel and the others. It's not true that the entire world is against us. A very central part of their solution is a real effort to hold an open democracy, also in very harsh circumstances. An open democracy, it's the best weapon against all those people and haters. By the way, even in these very days, another government in Jerusalem that would have acted with determination in order to strengthen the security while bravely guarding democracy would have had much more support in the entire world and in the capitals of the countries. The public has been exposed for years to an erroneous and propaganda as if there is a conflict which you cannot gap between the security needs in Israel and the solution of the two states. This is a blatant lie. There's no such contradiction. I said it in the past that if we'll convene in one room all the chief of staffs and the heads of Shabak and the heads of intelligence and the heads of former Mossad who are living with us, 90% of them will tell you that it's easier to defend Israel and its citizens in a border that reflects the security interest with a Jewish majority forever, together with it on its side. A Palestinian state would enable us to defend one Jewish nation state from the sea to the Jordan, and it's much easier than to have millions of Palestinians and other many lines in order to blind the public and not to have him see what has to be done in order to defend the security of Israel and its citizens, and not the agenda of pipe dreams that the government has. And other examples, the one who actually jeopardizes 80% of the settlers, those who live in the blocks of settlement and Jerusalem, are the extreme radical members who continue to see in these isolated settlements as if they are something that we need to have. Also, the knifing and the shooting recently are those who send those terrorists, and it's very difficult to deal with it. But if you leave such gaps in the security fence in Judea and Samaria and Jerusalem, because fearing that there'll be a whole line, which might be a separation line, actually indirectly contributes to the capability of the terrorists to do their attacks. And for decades, the Israeli governments are trying to reduce the conflict, and to reduce it just to the Palestinian aspect in order to prevent it making a religious war against the entire Islam. The ones who keep the status quo in the holy sites, that's exactly the opposite, and is playing with fire. The fourth thing, the one who brings Daesh close to our cities and tries to make the Palestinian Authority collapse, and does it in Judea and Samaria while ignoring the recommendations of the Shabak and the IDF, and that is instead of strengthening the Palestinian Authority. And the government reports great successes, but it really failed in the contact vis-à-vis the United States after the signing of the agreement with Iran. The agreement was and still is a bad agreement. It's an agreement that we were opposed to, justifiably so. But the moment it became a fact, the Prime Minister himself missed out without any reason and in a complete frivolity that you cannot even explain. Such a rare opportunity to organize with the United States very generous standing to continue to cope with the Iranian challenge, both in the intelligence and the military aspect. I think we're going to get in the next 10 decades $7 billion less than what we could have achieved a year ago. Most of them on account of investment in Israeli development and our industry. And this is a direct damage, not the only one, because there's no proper consideration and thought. And it's not true that the Arabs are the same Arabs. We, the older people among us, remember very well the 3 no's of Khartoum in '67. We remember the no's of Khartoum: no recognition, no negotiation, no agreement. What will be taken by force will be returned by force. And today, 50 years on, we have a peace agreement with Egypt for the last 40 years. It lived in tests with peace with Jordan, more than 20 years, and 15 years on the table. There is a suggestion. It's not perfect, but it's much further than the no's of Khartoum, the proposal of the Arab League and Saudi Arabia to end the conflict. It's not ideal, but again, I say that together with our reservations, nevertheless, it's a basis for negotiation. Who presumes to know what's going to happen in the future? Maybe there will be an agreement because of that. And altogether, what exactly can Israel lose in our current situation than an attempt to try and test it in a real negotiation? The international conference is the only opportunity that sooner or later is going to evaporate because of other developments. Lack of an attempt to do something about it will be another aspect of the big gamma of failures of this government. What do we have to do then? First of all, we have to amend what was spoiled, to go back to the main essence. First of all, security, as is what actually strengthens the security, and not just feeding the public with all sorts of lies and using security as a screen of smoke.
The actual cohesion and the unity of the people is even more important than that of a greater Israel. So why should such a healthy, actual people accept everything, the opposite that is being actually promulgated, and a democracy as the path and the core and the pith of what we believe in? After all, it should be pluralistic and so full of energy and so diverse as Israel society is, and fourth, a paragon society. And it is not arbitrary that that is what our forefathers strived for. One cannot over-exaggerate the force that can unite that was actually embedded in that vision and how it conveys it to all the individuals in society and the whole society in its entirety. And this national project of Zionism, wherein it establishes and reverberates as a kind of folk story with the heritage of the Judaism and the prophets and the stories of the prophets that reverberate and are embedded within it. All that will not be able to take place unless we have the energy and take those steps so that we go shoulder to shoulder and understand that first and foremost, security, the unity of the people, democracy, and a paragon society. Without it, it will not happen. We must curb a government and a prime minister who are so short-sighted and who do not see the future, and leading all of us into this bi-nation state with that kind of agenda on the slippery slope of that in a direction of a moral and functional abyss, drowning in the actual siren song of messianic and the messianic tune that we hear in the background. This is a strong and good nation and people, and IDF is strong, and the more Israelis have a part in what they see ahead of them. It is the government that was hijacked. They are the ones who are actually really inciting all the people from into that kind of mendacious story and diverting us and distorting what is happening. They're distorting us from our path of Zionism with a stress on deeds instead of words, the content rather than the wrapping. Zionism was established in order for us to take our destiny in our own hands and to march ahead, which is always one that has dangers upon it. We must remove ourselves, extricate ourselves from pessimism and passivity and the other isms, because we must act. We have to extricate ourselves from that situation. And what can we do immediately? And United States, it worries me that those are the words I used exactly a year ago from this podium, even before the Iranian agreement. And what did the world lie back on its laurels and freeze? But the government, our government did. Why? With the United States, immediate work ties that should be recreated and preserve Israel's military supremacy and the financing aid agreement for next 10 years. Iran, there have to be immediate, some kind of intelligence cooperation, because we know that there may be a discussion about our options, our military options against Iran, and we have to actually forge a multi-layered interception system if we're talking about the magic wand and David's sling and Iron Dome. And we have to think about the future battlefield and collaborate on these issues with our allies. We have to think about an international summit being convened. With the Palestinians, we have to adopt, first and foremost, security, that the commanders, with Amnon Reshev, Major General in reserves, one of the heroes from the Yom Kippur War, he will be able to head it. Over 100 commanders have signed that, and some of the highest echelons of power from the police and the other security services, and adopt it first and foremost without waiting for the results of an international summit. And what are these principles of this program? First of all, an Israeli initiative that is with no prerequisites about a partner, no bilateral separation steps, unilateral steps. And there has to be a plan in the hands of IDF until we reach that permanent arrangement. Unilateral separation from the Palestinians, backed with the tailwind of the United States, alongside each other, not one interwoven within the other, the Israelis and the Palestinians. The commitment of Israel to a two-state solution, and a temporary presence of the IDF in the various Palestinian territories. We have to think about the economic and other political issues that should normalize the relations and the ties and cut back on that friction in Jerusalem, the Gaza Strip, and the West Bank. Yes, there has to be a very strong regime on the borders. We have to make sure that no illegal aliens can actually trespass and infiltrate. We have to think about all these things. And in political domain, we have to declare an Israeli declaration that is a comprehensive one and a secure, confident one. First of all, accepting, yes, the Arab initiative with our qualifications vis-a-vis democracy, security, demography and security before that negotiation. Yes, we have to think through negotiations how we can settle these conflicts with a two-nation solution, two-state solution. Israel should, if they want actually sovereignty over the fence, but it has to be in the entire field all the way until they reach that final agreement, and everything should be accepted by Israel, of course. Number 4, a freezing of new building in those isolated settlements. A ratification of Israel to to retain the status quo in the holy sites and on Temple Mount. They should clarify Israel's stand that the Judean Samaria and the Gaza Strip are one political unit for the sake of the negotiations for a permanent status agreement. There should be economic, civic steps taken in Judea and Samaria in order to strengthen the Palestinian Authority. Yes, strengthening it. And in Jerusalem, the establishment of an administration of a civil administration in the villages while ensuring a total status quo in the Temple Mount and in the holy sites for the various religions. In the Gaza Strip, we have to take steps in order to prevent the collapse of the ceasefire and the prevention of a humanitarian crisis while rehabilitating and assisting, of course, subject to various security considerations of the Israelis. And in the isolated settlements beyond the settlement block, that there should be a legislation so that there will be vacation of an evacuation of these areas of people's own will and compensation so they will be able to move into the other areas in the settlement block and into Israel itself. Now, to summarize, we, for over a year, a government and a prime minister that is weak and is trampling and is belligerent, as you can see from its members, and it is truly causing that upheaval and is failing us on security issues and literally bring about a collapse of democracy and creating such distance and friction with the United States and the rest of the world, missing out on opportunities time and time again, and paralyzed from action to streamline the whole conflict and manage it in such an efficient manner, because they say there is no partner. Because what really is at the top of Benjamin Netanyahu's priorities is not the security of the State of Israel. It is not the preservation of democracy. It is not the closing of gaps and bridging them in society. And it is not an internal unity of our people, but rather a kind of crawling promotion, a rather sort of mischievous, rather sly one of agenda that is a direct threat on the actual identity and image of the State of Israel and the entire Zionist enterprise. This is an elected government, and as I said a year ago from this podium, we must demand of that accountability. The balance up to now is being aggravated and deteriorating. The bottom line is extremely concerning in its content and in its direction. Israel needs a different leadership that will hold on to a compass and not something that will shake us from side to side. It should not be and something that it has existed up to now. I'm calling upon the government to go back to the tracks, because if it does not happen, then all of us, yes, all of us will have to get up from our seats, our comfortable and even the less comfortable ones, and topple that government through a popular revolution and putting the right ballot in the box before we get to the point of no return.